Hello and welcome to 100 Days. It's Monday afternoon in Washington, the first working week of the Donald Trump presidency, and there are big changes already underway.
So what will a Trump administration mean for the United States and for the rest of the world? With such global upheaval over the past year, we'll be exploring what happens next.
There'll be a new way of doing business here in Washington. This morning, the president signed an executive order withdrawing the United States from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. A White House press conference is now underway as the war of words between the new administration and the media about the size of the inauguration crowd continues. And when it comes to building the wall, can President Trump really make Mexico pay for it? We'll hear from both sides of the border.
Also, fresh peace talks on Syria, and it's Russia leading the way. Could President Trump's warming relations with Moscow break the deadlock? And when it comes to foreign relations, what does President Trump's foreign policy mean for Europe and its longer-term security?
Hello and welcome to 100 Days, our new program dominated by the first few months of Donald Trump's presidency and what kind of changes it's going to bring to the world.
There are big things happening in Europe, upcoming elections, Brexit, the conflict in Syria. Over this next 100 days, we'll be looking at all of that and how the America First policy will reshape relations around the world.
Yes, but Christian, let's start right here in Washington. And in the past half hour, Sean Spicer, he's the President Trump's spokesperson, has been speaking to the White House press corps. Our Washington reporter, Anthony Zerka, is with her. Anthony, I was listening to the beginning of the press conference and it sounded like a remarkably normal press conference.
It was, and if you'll remember, this came off the heels of Saturday's non-press conference where Sean Spicer stood up and basically berated the press for their coverage of inauguration. He came out today and said that he wasn't going to be as popular as his predecessor, and then went into a description of what Donald Trump had been doing throughout the day. And then he took questions, unlike Saturday, from the media, and the first question he took was on the wall and Trump's promise to begin building the wall, as I think we have in this clip.
The president has noted that this was a serious priority of his throughout the campaign. He has already started to work with Congress on the appropriations avenue of that, and so he is doing everything he can to direct agencies and Congress to commence with that work as soon as possible.
Sean Spicer there talking about the wall. Anthony, I couldn't help notice that joke, like you were saying at the beginning of the press conference. It still feels pretty awkward, all this, doesn't it? Do you think they've discussed over the weekend that taking on the press in the way they did on Saturday, that is a zero-sum game? It might have been good in the campaign, but it doesn't work now they're in the White House.
No, it's definitely risky, and Donald Trump was ranting against the press in front of a CIA memorial for their war dead or their killed in action, and then to have Spicer come out and actually one-up Donald Trump and be even more aggressive towards the media, lecturing them before leaving without taking questions. He became the story through much of the weekend, and in most traditional White Houses, the press secretary doesn't want to be the story. He wants to let the policies and the programs of the new president take the lead.
OK, Anthony Zerka in Washington. Thank you very much for the moment. We're going to keep our eye on that press conference, Caddy, and we'll obviously bring us, our viewers, more details on that as we get them. But already the president has been busy signing a series of executive orders, certainly more to come through the week as well, all built on that promise to put America on top.
Yeah, Christian, he hasn't been hanging around. In the past couple of hours, he signed 3 of those orders, withdrawing the US from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, banning American funds for international groups that perform abortions, and finally he's ordered a freeze on all federal hiring. It's just a start of his big agenda. How much more can he actually do?
He had promised a slew of executive actions to advance his agenda and to reverse Barack Obama's. And within hours of taking office, Donald Trump signed documents to roll back the health insurance law known as Obamacare. Today, he withdrew America from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, a protectionist move he says is key to securing American jobs and economic prosperity. In both tone and substance, Donald Trump promises to be a very different president from his immediate predecessors.
Protect and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
I think it'll be quite revolutionary. I would expect him to place much more emphasis on the growth of the economy, higher wages, better opportunities for people. I'm not sure that he's going to be trying to start out seeking compromise. I think he's going to be starting out trying to get the job done that he said to the American people he would do. And I believe that means looking after the people that he thinks have been left behind.
From the minute Mr. Trump took the oath of office, he faced the challenge of transforming his campaign slogans into policies. He says his ethos of America First is the scaffolding on which he will build his entire agenda. Illegal immigration, tax reform, the destruction of ISIS, they're all in his immediate sights.
We have to build a wall, folks.
It also means making good on his campaign pledge to build a wall along the 1,900-mile border with Mexico. But here he could meet his first big hurdle. Will Congress really pay for it? Mr. Trump will need popular support to get these big things done. On Saturday, I went down to see the Women's March in Washington, where it was clear just how unpopular he is.
These people are scared and angry and determined. Can they stop Donald Trump's agenda? Probably not. But in the game that is American politics, approval ratings do matter. They're like chips that you can cash in to get things done. And if your ratings are low, you have fewer chips in your pocket.
This is what democracy looks like. The Republican politicians who sat stony-faced at the inauguration as Mr. Trump derided the establishment will give their new president a lot of what he wants, in return for the power he has given them. But the fact that he is not an ideological conservative means the Republican Congress will undoubtedly also run into conflict with their president.
On the issue of infrastructure spending, the notion that we would spend $1 trillion that would be unpaid for, I think will be very difficult for some fiscal conservatives to swallow. But for the time being, at least, I think most Republicans, if not all, are willing to give the president the benefit of the doubt. Now, once you get out beyond 100 days, when the honeymoon period, as it were, is over, then I think some of those divisions will become a little more clear.
Mr. Trump clearly intends to govern as he campaigned, in full fight mode. But he's set huge goals for himself, and he will need friends and allies to get things done.
Well, let's talk to Jan Brewer. She was the Republican governor of Arizona from 2009 until 2015 and a supporter of Donald Trump's. Governor Brewer, thank you so much for joining 100 Days.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be with you this morning.
Thank you. I want to start by asking you with some global reaction to what the president has already done this morning, and that is withdrawing America from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. The Germans and the Mexicans have already said that if America is going to withdraw from TPP, they are going to seek alliances themselves with some of those countries. Is President Trump at risk of alienating just too many allies in his protectionist stance?
I don't think so. I think that when he was on the campaign trail, he was very, very clear that he thought it was an unfair partnership dealing with the United States, and that he was going to rescind it. And he said he would do it immediately. He didn't like the way it was drawn. It was, you know, it's a huge document. Who knows what all really truly is in it? And I know they worked a long time on it, but I think that we can come back and possibly regroup and continue working. But I think he has promised the people of the United States that he was going to rescind it, and he has, and he did it as promised. And I think that's what the American people wanted. I mean, he won overwhelmingly the electoral votes in the United States based on his
candor. But Governor, you know that words have consequences, and President Trump's inaugural address and his promise of America First and his refusal in that address to reach out to traditional allies has clearly rankled. The Germans, today we had President Peña Nieto in Mexico giving a press conference saying, we're not going to submit to the United States.
Well, the bottom line is that we know that Mexico is our neighbor. Certainly, I know that Mexico is our neighbor, coming and having governed in the state of Arizona, and we do a lot of commerce back and forth. But you know, in regards to the wall and to NAFTA, that needs to be renegotiated. We need to decide and determine just exactly, or relook at it. That all came about, in 1990. A lot of things have changed, and so Donald Trump wants to bring it up to date, make it current, make it work for everybody.
I want to ask you about the other executive order that Donald Trump signed this morning, and that is banning American federal funds from financing international organizations that support abortion. Are we in for 4 years of fights over women's reproductive rights issues? You saw the protests over the course of the weekend, and it was a big theme at those demonstrations.
It was pretty stunning to see those many people out there protesting or demonstrating or whatever you want to call it on the day after the inaugural of our United States duly elected president. You know, I wish that they hadn't done it, but you know, these are complicated issues, and abortion has always been very volatile in the United States because we have I would say the majority of people that believe that they don't support abortion. And, you know, it's going to be a conflict. It always has been a conflict. But we're hopeful that we'll get it resolved and that it will be, that Roe versus Wade gets overturned. Donald Trump said he would work towards that direction. So, again, he delivered on his promise to the people that elected him.
Okay, Governor Breaux, we're going to come back with you later on in the program to talk about that war with Mexico as well. Thanks for joining us here on 100 Days.
Thank you so much.
Kathy, it's good to have Governor Breaux with us. It's interesting, I just picked up on one of the first things she said to you in that interview, and it's about this sense of fairness. She said it's unfair, the trade deals that America has at the moment, and that's something that played very highly with his supporters during the campaign.
Look, I think this is a core belief of President Trump's, the idea that America's been taken for a ride, whether it's on trade deals, NAFTA, whether it's because of China, and whether, frankly, Christian, as well over NATO. And America's allies traditionally have not paid enough on their defense bills. And I think this underlines his worldview. America has done too much since the Second World War to support its allies and to support its friends, and in return it's had a bad deal. And he is now going to change all of that.
And yet you look at his approval ratings, they're some of the poorest approval ratings of modern times. He's got to get himself on the front foot. And you saw there from Sean Spicer's press conference just a few minutes ago, laying out all those business leaders that are coming to them, all the big business leaders. And presumably behind closed doors, they're saying, look, this is really about job creation. This is what we need to do.
Yeah, and that speech that he gave on Friday was a speech all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, what Governor Brewer did not mention, right, is that trade is not the big issue here. The big issue in American jobs is automation. By some economists' estimate, 4 to 1. It's by automation. It's robots. It's computer chips that have lost jobs in America as much as it is trade deals. And that's not something that Donald Trump has managed to address and that his team is actually grappling with. Problem for the rest of the world as well, of course. Those are the domestic issues. There are also big international issues, as you know, Christian. And the Syria crisis is going to be one of the big foreign policy issues for the administration coming up in these weeks.
That's right, yeah. They're going to be talking an awful lot about Syria in the coming weeks. And of course, there are talks ongoing today in Kazakhstan, in Astana, a former Soviet republic. When it comes to Syria, are the Americans equal partners? Well, not this time, it seems, because it's Russia and Turkey that are playing host. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, has been looking at the shifting geopolitics of the Syrian war.
This new alliance is reshaping Syria's battlefield. President Erdogan and President Putin still back opposing sides in a tangled war. But last week, they conducted their first joint bombing raid against so-called Islamic State. And last year, they worked together to end the decisive battle for Aleppo and then brokered a Syria-wide ceasefire between President Assad's forces and rebel fighters. The first game changer, September 2015. Russia entered the war, rescuing the Syrian army from collapse on key front lines, transforming Russia into Syria's most pivotal player and boosting its global stature. Its military assets in Syria now include an expanded naval facility, Tartus on the Mediterranean, and a new airbase near Latakia. So what's in it for Turkey? Well, that's the other game changer. Last year, Turkey's President Erdogan tilted towards Russia and away from the West, including the US, blaming it for the July coup and the rise of IS, now targeting Turkey. He still wants President Assad to go someday, But his main enemy in Syria now is Kurdish fighters linked to Turkey's PKK, which he calls terrorists. Turkey sent its own forces across the border last year, ostensibly to fight against so-called Islamic State in places like Jarablus and Al-Bab, but mainly to halt the advance of Kurdish fighters carving out their own enclave. And that's the deal. Russia accepted Turkey's sway along its border, and Turkey pushed rebel groups to pull out of a losing war in Aleppo and persuaded some to accept a ceasefire, at least for now. So what's next? President Trump. He could join this new access. He says his priority is to work with President Putin to fight IS and other extremists in Syria. Well, it's not clear if he'll continue to support rebels fighting President Assad. And there are other players with other agendas. Iran also backs President Assad, providing an array of militias, including Lebanese Hezbollah fighters. Gulf states arm the opposition, but their real enemy is Iran. Ending this destructive war isn't any easier, even if the great game has changed. And in the end, it's Syrians who will have the final say.
Lise Doucet reporting for us there. And it does seem to be one of the big facts of geopolitics at the moment that the West is on the back foot in Syria and indeed, Christian, in many of the hotspots around the world.
Indeed. Let's pick that up and talk to the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and writer Anne Applebaum, who's in London for us, and also the former Russian MP and vice chair of the International Affairs Committee in the State Duma, Natalia Narochnitskaya in Moscow. Thank you both for joining us. And let me start with you and talk specifically about Syria for a second. I suppose the very fact that these talks are in Astana, in a former Soviet republic, rather than in Geneva, says an awful lot about the New World Order.
Well, it doesn't really say that much new. The role that Russia's been playing, an important role in Syria for many months now. I'm not sure that anything has changed because of the American election. What it does indicate, though, is how complicated the Syrian situation is going to be for Trump, because on the one hand, he said that he would like to be closer to Russia. On the other hand, he said that he would not like to be closer to Iran. In Syria, he faces a coalition of Russia and Iran who are backing a totalitarian dictator and the reimposition of authoritarian rule. And so he's going to have to make some decisions about which side he's on. And the previous administration didn't find that an easy choice. And he's pretended that many of his choices are going to be easy, and I don't think this one will be.
And on that issue of Iran, Natalia, that is going to be the sticky subject, isn't it? They might see eye to eye on a good many more things than he did with President Obama, but President Putin has a close ally in Iran.
Yes, very close. The Russians and the Iranians are close on a number of issues. And Trump has, at least at some points during the campaign, of course, he changes his rhetoric from day to day, so it's very hard to know what he actually cares about. But at some points during the campaign, he indicated, for example, that he wanted to change or renegotiate or even blow up the American nuclear arrangement with Iran. And that, of course, would have a knock-on effect on Russia as well.
Natalia Narochnitskaya in Moscow, are they popping the champagne corks in Russia at the moment over the inauguration of President Trump?
Good evening. The inauguration speech and address of Donald Trump was watched by many Russians, of course, and I must say that experts believe that the speech was rather promising, and I would emphasize one thing I found very important there. Donald Trump, as far as the foreign policy was concerned, said that America would seek friendship and goodwill with all countries of the world. And doing that, they will do that in understanding that each nation, every nation, has right to put its national interests first. And this, to me, who has watched the mainstream of several decades, very politicized Manichaean division of the world between good states and rogue states, this is very promising, because that means that Donald Trump, at least in his speech or in his vision, in his thought, in his mind, is departing from this very Trotskyite-like ideological foundation of the foreign policy, which produced in our eyes the mixture of neo-Wilsonian ideology and Theodore Roosevelt or Senator Beveridge interventionism. That's rather promising, and that sticks to the international law and to Chapter 1 of the United Nations Charter.
Right, but
So,
Anne Applebaum, that's the problem, isn't it, to some extent, that treating everybody the same is exactly what is alarming America's allies at the moment. I mean, even the comparison that he made between Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin.
I think you need to step back for a minute and we need to think about what it was that constituted American power and American influence for so many decades. And the answer to that was America's system of alliances. And these were alliances which were not based merely on national interest or on self-interest, but on a common sense of security, on shared values, on shared economic interess. All of these, this was the way in which America has exercised power up until now. A few minutes ago, a previous guest on your program said, well, these alliances, what did they bring us? I mean, I think the answer is they made America the predominant country. They gave America the right to set rules, together with the allies. And in many cases, it meant that America and its allies were able to preserve the peace. Certainly there's been peace in Europe for many decades. There's been peace in Asia for many decades as well. So the question now is really a little bit different from how you've just characterized it. The question is, if America withdraws that, and if, as you've just said, as our Russian colleague has just said, America is no longer interested in these ideals and it's not interested in democracy, then what happens to its alliances? And then the question is, will the system of rules, will the liberal order, meaning the liberal economic order, be maintained? Will the prosperity that we've known for the last few decades continue? And that is now very much in question. And I don't really think it's in anybody's interest, including not the Russian people's interest, for international trade to break down or for international institutions to fall apart. I don't think it's going to be good for anybody.
Of course, there is the point, Anne, and Donald Trump's made this point, that maybe a warming relationship with Moscow is a good thing. And Natalia, if I could put to you, I don't know if you know any more about these reports we've had that today Russian jets have been flying in tandem with American jets. It's been denied by the American side, but that would be unprecedented, wouldn't it? I can't think of a time when Russian jets would be flying with American jets in theatre.
Sorry, that's been denied. That's not true, actually.
I haven't heard anything like that. There was a piece of news I just read that Russian jets became an information about ISIL goals. So only that, but
well, let me take it another direction. Together. If in these warming relations that was possible in the fight against so-called Islamic State, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? Both?
I'm sorry. I think you've just fallen for a piece of Russian disinformation. That's actually apparently not true. So I'm not sure why we're talking about it.
But, well, it's come from the Russian side. What I'm saying is, in the fight against so-called Islamic State, is that a possibility? Is it something that the two countries could work together on?
Well, Russia's not really fighting the Islamic State. Russia is fighting in favor of Assad against whoever is fighting Assad. So you have to be careful. You have to understand what's happening in Syria and not accept what the Russians say.
Let me just bring in Natalia for a second.
Only partially I would agree that we are supporting the Syrian army, since it can be qualified as the only serious force that can be put against the ISIL. So that's why we are fighting together. But we would certainly welcome the American participation, and I believe that it's not quite impossible with Trump's vision, because America happened to be sort of to isolate herself from serious posture in Syria. So to overcome this, you have to participate, and then you might influence even Iran, although it's a very hard partner.
Been in Syria for many months.
OK, we'll have to bring it to an end there. Anne Applebaum and Natalia Nalechnitskaya, thank you both very much. There you go, Kathy. You see, I've just strayed into the realms of facts and alternative facts.
It does look like that. Look, that's fascinating, because this is really what this is about, right, Christian? It's the question of what America's role is going to be. We've had 70 years, ever since Pearl Harbor, of America leading the world, talking about ideals, talking not necessarily just about America's self-interest. And Donald Trump on Friday upended that system, as Anne Applebaum was suggesting. Now, in that process, there are going to be some winners, perhaps Moscow, and there are going to be some losers, perhaps Europe, and it's going to be fascinating, don't you think, to watch how this shakes out?
Well, absolutely, and fascinating later in the week because Theresa May is going to be in Washington, and of course Brexit is uppermost in her mind, but she will have spoken to other European leaders and they will be talking about NATO and European security as well, you would imagine.
They'll be talking about that too, and she's already said that she's going to stand up to Donald Trump when she feels she needs to. There is more on that story on our website and, of course, on our smartphone app as well. And there's more from our business team on Trumponomics, what we know so far about the president's economic plans.
You're watching 100 Days from BBC News.